the corner of your eye, huddled in the darkest shadows of imagination, it waits. Now is the time to face the fear. Welcome to Horror Lasagna. Embrace the trepidation.
All right, Midsommar, Somar, whatever. How do you say
Midsommar.
that?
I just say Midsommar.
Midsommar. Okay.
Yeah.
Is it kind of the Swedish way of writing it?
So I'm not really sure. I was really shocked to find out that it's an actual holiday.
Really?
And it's not just a Swedish holiday. It's like a decent sized holiday all through Eastern Europe, like worldwide. There's a
But
lot of
not this
midsummer
version
celebration.
of it, I hope.
No, no. Um, the holiday is based on the winter solstice. In fact, whenever people are listening to this, we happen to be recording this the week after Midsummer, so um,
Right.
it kind of worked out. It's celebrated in several countries worldwide, and there's even a handful of locations in the States where they actually celebrate Midsummer. Alaska is a big
Well,
one because, not unlike Sweden, midsummer is when you will have a day where you have no night, really. You get a dusky twilight at midnight, but that's about it.
right. And they talk about that in the movie a bit.
Yeah. The holiday is so important to Sweden, it's even been proposed to be made the national day of Sweden.
No.
Um, it started as a pagan holiday. Christianity came in and, like Christian tradition does, they usurped it and made it St. John the Baptist Day, which biblically, St. John the Baptist was Jesus's older cousin. And so this would make him, on the Christian calendar, 6 months older than Jesus was because Jesus was born in Christmas. So
Because
traditionally,
that's accurate too.
well, yeah, right. Traditionally, bonfires are typically lit. It keeps evil spirits and witches at bay. And in Sweden, the actual holiday, the celebration takes place on Midsummer Eve, not unlike Halloween and All Saints' Day for us.
Right.
So that Halloween is such a big deal, nobody even knows about All Saints' Day. But
Right.
that was like a pairing, Midsummer Eve and Midsummer. So yeah, it's actually a tradition that we just don't celebrate very much around here, but a lot of places really, really do.
Well, I'd be okay celebrating it, just not in the fashion portrayed in the movie.
Yes,
Let's not do that version.
right. The movie is a U.S. and Swedish film. It was released in 2019. It was written and directed by a man named Ari Aster. This was only his second major motion picture, his first being Heredity, which came out and to great acclaim. And pretty much as soon as Heredity came out, he was greenlit to do this project.
Wow.
I mean, they were like, "Yeah, you're going to do another one for us." A lot of Astor's other work are shorts, and you can actually go on YouTube and watch
Oh,
almost all of them,
wow.
which is kind of cool. I mean, some of them look like film student work, and then other of them are like, not unlike Midsummer, this kind of ambiguously disturbing thing that you're watching. So,
And I remember this is one of the few ones we've done that I remember being big, like movie posters on
yep.
the side of the theaters and on TV, watching just regular TV shows, seeing ads and trailers and stuff. I mean, I remember it being big.
And Heredity was a big key to that because Heredity he kind of did on his own. A24 was behind all of this, good on them, taking this unknown guy, and that's kind of their niche, right? A24 introduces a lot of stuff. He came out with Heredity, and it was such a hit that like everyone's like, "Wow, what's his next one going to be?" It's not unlike shoot, Key and Peele. Jordan Peele
Oh,
did.
The Us
Yes, but
Us
not
movie,
Us. The one
Get
before it.
Out,
Yes,
Get
Get
Out.
Out. Um, where it was just his first offering as a director, as everyone knew, and it was phenomenal.
Yeah.
Now Ari Aster's a little less like that because people at least knew Jordan Peele.
Yeah, the
No,
comedy guy. Let's make a horror that's
right.
truly different and really scary thinking about it. Yeah, both of those were really good. I was very impressed with both those.
Oh yeah,
And it was okay. Off this topic for just 1 second. Get Out
sure.
was one of those that a bunch of us watched it and we got done and we sat around and discussed it for like an hour. What we saw, what we thought, and various aspects. It just had so many things. We talk about that pop in your mind and questions and stuff. And it's very rare in today's world that we get a movie that you discuss afterwards to that length and detail, not just
Right.
reiterating it, but questions and opinions and thoughts. And, that's a rare movie, I must say. So those are good
Yeah.
ones. And this
Um,
one has a few of those also.
yeah. That's what made doing this one so difficult because it's hard to decide how to proceed because there's so much going on in it. You could just spend hours,
Yeah.
discussing this movie. And if you've listened to a lot of our podcasts, you shouldn't be overly surprised to find that I'm like a big fan of Ari Aster's work. So, um,
And you wrote a few notes for this one, I hear.
oh God, 14 pages when I was done. that's like a term paper.
We need to
Um,
teach you dictate or dictaphone dictation. So
yes, because when you're having to do the movie and then pause and then type and then go back to the movie, this
right.
movie is not short. It's 2 hours and 27 minutes long. That's eight,
Uh,
10 hours worth of typing on my end from, oh, pause, type, 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 start.
right.
Oh, pause, type, type, type. I think when I was doing it, I was like the first 5 to 10 minutes, I was on that for like an hour. It was insane.
Yeah. And I've got a couple comments about that whole aspect of the movie when we get to
Yeah.
it.
He wrote and directed this movie. He was born in New York City and trained at the American Film Institute in Los Angeles.
Hmm.
And again, he's got a whole bunch of shorts. You can find a lot of them on YouTube. He's only got 2 full-length movies, Heredity and Midsommar, and there's one in the can called Disappointment Boulevard, which
Nice.
I
Can't
don't know
wait.
anything about. And honestly, I think that's the best way to go into his films if you don't know anything about them. If you're going in just completely clean, um, because Steve and I have discussed this, I saw Heredity first, and it influenced what I was thinking when I came into Midsommar. And the way Midsommar ends, I was like shocked. And so I mentioned that to Steve, and now Steve's seen Midsommar, and he's going to watch Heredity, and so I'll
Right.
be interested to see how the viewing of Midsommar is going to affect the way he watches Heredity.
The other way. Yeah. And
Yeah,
I think in general, a lot of horror is best to go into without knowing much because
yeah,
today's trailers give away so many
they
things.
do. Yeah,
It doesn't work so well. And I've had that argument with horror novels. There's a lot of people that say, oh, you got to have the action and the conflict right on the first page or it doesn't grasp people. I'm like, but that's antithesis to a good horror novel. You do that and there's no build up. So it
right.
means it doesn't fit. So yeah, avoid trailers if you want to see. If you like horror, just go see the horror movies. Some of
Yeah,
them will be, but some will be good.
watching the duds is half the fun.
We've watched a few in our time,
Yeah. Um,
more than a few.
yeah. Now, I will say, when you read reviews for Midsummer, you'll get this a lot where people see Heredity and they're like, that was awesome. And they'll go watch Midsummer and they're like, that sucks because they're 2 very different films. The art and the craft that he does when he makes these movies is very similar, but in tone and everything between these 2 movies, they're very different. And he claims that when he made Heredity, he didn't intend on making a horror movie, which I have a hard time believing that. But that's what he claims. He said he just set out to make a family drama, and it turned into a horror movie. And he says the same thing about Midsommar. Midsommar was a breakup film that evolved into a horror movie. He
And
didn't.
it's not a typical horror movie at all.
Oh
It's
no.
a very subtle. It's not even really psychological so much as some of the others we've seen. It's hard to define. I was like, wow, this is really hard to say why it's horror. It's got horrific elements all throughout, and it builds up. But yeah, the whole way everything builds up, it's like you're watching two movies at times almost. The way it goes back and forth.
It reminds me a lot of Audition,
Oh
where
yeah,
you're watching a movie and it has like this feel to it, and there's kind of this undercurrent of ominousness that's going on, and you're not really sure why. And then at the end, you find out why, kind
yeah,
of thing.
yeah,
Um,
exactly.
he also didn't set out to make Midsummer and Heredity a set, but now that he's looking back on them, he kind of does pair them up, because Heredity is a very dark movie, and the evil slash horror part of it is very supernatural and visceral. It's kind of in your face. I mean, not really in your face because you really can't necessarily see it because everything's so dark, but it's there. Heredity, Midsummer is crazy bright. In fact, there are times when like the lens is, blue, the whites just blow it out because it's so
Right.
bright.
Because
The evil,
it's Swedish, like you said, during the middle of the time when there's no darkness. It's daylight all the time. And he
yep,
brings that out a lot.
and the evil and horror in Midsummer is like personal and subtle. It's not. I liken it to Heredity is like a werewolf beating down your door, and Midsummer is like you getting a letter from the IRS. They both have a sense of dread, but one much more immediate.
That needs to be our T-shirt. Midsummer, like getting a letter from the IRS.
Yeah. I'd classify both of those movies as literary horror. When we talk about classifying horror movies,
Yeah,
where there's so much more subtext in what's actually happening in the background and with the characters than necessarily action happening on the screen.
yeah.
Astor considers both to be what he terms folk horror, which I think is another good term. Like Mama, you could almost call a folk horror story. Um, he said in an interview, I would say Hereditary absolutely is a horror film, unabashedly. And this film is, I'm very careful to call it, an adult fairy tale. That's what this is. It's a adult contemporary fairy tale. Um, and, going by the definition of fairy tale we used on Mama, where it has to have a clear opening and a clear ending, there has to be a supernatural element and a clear evil. The clear evil part is kind of hard to put your finger on in this
And
movie.
and really, this would be the discussion: is it evil? Is there evil in the movie or not?
Right.
Because it could be definitely argued there's not.
Yeah.
It's horrific, but not evil.
Yeah. It, so we'll get to it in a second. Um, Astor wanted this film to be a breakup film. He had just gone through a breakup, something you would go to see if you'd had been in a relationship that recently ended. He didn't consider himself a horror director. He thinks that horror as a genre is rich with potential when it's done well, and it can deliver amazing, moving experiences to the audience. But a lot of the movies are cynically written and miss the mark.
Well, so
So,
yeah, and that could be our recommendation then. This is a breakup movie, so for date night, go get Dirty Dancing and Midsummer. That'd be a good date night right there.
yeah, well, it's really funny because whenever I talk to my kids about these movies sometimes when they're interested, and whenever I talk to them, I'm like, yeah, it's kind of a horror movie, but I would highly recommend that my daughters watch this movie because this is kind of a female empowerment film. It doesn't
You,
have to be. You could switch the genders of everyone around, but because Danny, is like the main character of this film, it makes it like this movie that kind of lifts women up.
well, that's the pagan beliefs and rituals. A lot of times are the Mother Earth and Mother Goddess and honoring the sacred birth and giving birth and all that. So I mean,
Yeah.
this really touches on that a lot. And I think maybe that's part of the horrific part is it's these practices we would think of as ancient but brought into the modern world and completely acceptable by these people. So that's part of the horrific element there.
One of the other horrific parts to it for me, and is this dissonance that happens, and it happened like in Audition when she's putting those needles in the guy, and she's making that little tiki 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 noise. That that sound doesn't go with that action.
Right.
Or Wes Craven's original Last House on the Left, the music that they play while the people are doing horrific things is almost like that kind of airy fairy circus 70s kind of music, and you're like, that doesn't sync up with this at all, which makes it more disturbing. And
Right.
so, like at the end of Midsummer, where all of a sudden there's this smiling beautiful Swedish woman opening your eyes as you're a Christian, and she's like, okay, you can't move and you can't talk now, all right? And she smiles and she steps back, and you're like, that doesn't jibe with what's about to happen.
Yeah.
That dissonance can really pack a punch.
Yeah, and we mentioned Peele. He's got that in his movies. That's probably
Yeah.
what makes them so good. It's that unexpected what's really going on and that twist in the norm of what you expect or are used
Yep.
to.
Yep. This movie hits pretty well with critics, but not always with audiences. Rotten Tomatoes has an 83% approval rating from the critics and only 63% from audiences.
It's definitely another one I would pick and choose who I recommend it to.
Yep. It was nominated for 77 awards and won 27. A lot of those going to Florence Pugh for her performance. Some going to Ari Aster, the production team, and even Trippiest Movie of the Year from the Golden Schmoes Award was something that they won.
Nice.
The budget for this was estimated to be about $9 million. And this is one of those, success stories because of all the hype leading up to it. The budget was $9 million, and it took in $27.5 million gross in the U.S. and $48 million gross worldwide.
Nice.
So it did well for the theaters. It's not surprising that he has a third one, already
Right.
shot.
And wow, 9 million, because it's small set, one set really, build the set and we're done
Yep.
for the most part.
Yeah. Florence Pugh is in this. She's a British actress. She plays Danny. She's been in 27 films. And
Wow.
for those of you who aren't really sure what you know her from, she's the new Black Widow.
Oh
It's not.
my God, I knew I recognized her. Holy
Yep.
crap.
Yep. She also did Lady Macbeth, King Lear. She was in Malevolent, which is another pretty good horror
That's a good
film.
one. Yeah.
Little Women, Father of the Bride 3, Black Widow, and Hawkeye. And she's got a whole lot of upcoming titles, including Puss in Boots sequel, a new movie about Oppenheimer, and she's in the second part of the new Dune series.
Oh,
So,
wow.
Jack Rayner plays Christian, Danny's boyfriend. He's been in 28 films. He is born in America but lives in Ireland now. So, she's a British actress. He's technically an Irish actor. Um, the movies he's been in: Transformers, Age of Extinction, Macbeth, On the Basis of Sex, Mowgli, and a ton of titles I did not know.
He
So
looked at a lot through the movie. He looked a lot like Chris Pratt's brother.
I know that's exactly what I thought while he was in it. William Jackson Harper plays Josh. He's been in 44 other titles. Law and Order, Criminal Intent, just Law and Order. Pardon me. Great performances. He did voiceover in Grand Theft Auto 4. He was in 30 Rock, the New Electric Company when we were doing that in the early 2000s. Tom Clancy's Jack Ryan. Most people will know him from as Chidi from The Good Place.
Okay.
He was in American Dad, The Underground Railroad, and a film called Dogs in Space, which I haven't seen, but the title intrigues me. So
As long as
he
he's
is
not playing Lekka or Liku or whatever that poor dog was.
he is the only American actor actually in this film. So,
Huh. Okay.
well, of the main cast, I should say. I didn't go
Okay.
through the entire list, but
Right. Okay.
Will Poulter plays Mark, and he's been in 29 films, including The Chronicles of Narnia, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. He was in the Maze Runner series, if you watched any of those. He was also in The Revenants, Black Mirror Bandersnatch. He was in the Underground Railroad as well with William Jackson Harper. That show Dope Sick on Hulu, and he will be Adam Warlock in the next Guardians of the Galaxy film.
Yep.
So,
Which will
most
be
of
interesting. I
the,
wouldn't picture him as that, but we'll see.
you can do a lot with gold paint. Most of the rest of the cast, and I'm kind of generalizing here, are Swedish, and they are accomplished, but we don't know anything that they've done. For instance, I refer to them as the honored couple. The old couple from the middle of the movie. The guy who is in that, the gentleman in there, is actually like well known. He got his start in some super famous Swedish film, and I don't know any of that stuff, but
Oh, yeah. Okay.
he's a big name. This film originally had an NC-17 rating. Astor cut 30 minutes out of it to get to an R rating, and at 3 hours or 2 hours and 25 minutes, cutting 30 minutes out was a good idea, because that would have
Yeah.
made it almost 3 hours.
Yeah, and I even make a note that like 30 minutes in, I'm like, okay, at this point, I know a lot of people would have been done. Like, I'm done with this. Nothing, because some of the shots, the way they're done and all that. So
Yes. When the film was released in Sweden, here it's like this psychological drama. In Sweden, it was pretty funny, and they considered it a dark comedy. They didn't really consider it a horror movie. So,
interesting. Those
yeah.
Swedes have weird humor.
Well, maybe. I mean, it would almost be like Tucker and Dale versus Evil shown, if someone was trying to do that seriously and they showed it to us, because we live out here in the sticks with the rednecks and stuff. And, we'd be,
very true. It's all a matter of perspective.
Yeah. For a movie that is so big for Sweden, it was actually shot in Hungary. So,
okay.
Budgetary restraints. The film was greenlit on May 18th of 2019, and it premiered on June 18th of 2019.
Holy crap.
Yeah. An amazing schedule.
Holy crap.
Yeah, the script has Danny and her friends living in New York City, and her parents live in Minneapolis, but the U.S. shots were all filmed in Utah. So, again, I'm assuming that had to do with budgetary constraints.
Probably. They got to stay with family.
Yeah. This movie is sometimes cited online as a good example of cult indoctrination. And I can see that. And this is where the what's good and what's bad thing comes up, right?
Yeah.
So before we dive into like the movie shot by shot, which, there's not enough time to do that, in a podcast, we'll go an overview. But in general, the concept of the cult that is, getting Danny to join, when I first saw the movie, I really didn't have a problem with them. I wasn't seeing it as a cult so much. Now, when you watch it a second time or a third time, you can see that they're far more duplicitous than they appear the first time through.
Yeah.
But I was seeing it as it's a culture clash.
Yes.
And while the things they're doing are horrific, there are like cultural reasons why they're doing this, and these people like came here voluntarily. So calling it like evil was a kind of a stretch for me.
Yeah.
On the other hand, the way Christian treats Danny at the first half of this movie, a lot of people are like, that's just relationship. And I'm like, he's literally gaslighting her and completely, basically ignoring her as a person, just keeping her as a girlfriend that he can put on the shelf and say, this is my girlfriend.
Because, oh, well, things didn't work out, so I'll go back to her tonight. Yeah. And again, right there, you brought up two things that could be argument. Is what the quote unquote cult does, is that evil, or is what he's doing to his girlfriend evil? Again, perspective. And It could be argued, are they a cult, or are they, because they're totally aware of what's going on, they're accepting of what's going on, they embrace and enjoy it, and it's not a problem for them. So is it our perspective that makes it look evil? Because to them it's not, and they're not, going out and just grabbing people off the street, 2, 3, 4 a month. What they say, every 70 years or something like that.
90 years.
90 years. So, and
Yeah.
that had the whole pagan, ancient mythologies thing, that whole cycle of such a long period of times, like the ancient evils and all
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
that right there is probably a whole essay dissertation for some class at college.
The number 9 is prevalent throughout this whole movie. You could just do numerology on this. The number of sacrifices at the end is 9. They break down the age groups into groups of 9.
Yeah.
It's a 90-year cycle. So the number 9 plays a big role in this.
No Beatles songs used.
That's right. Yeah, it's a good point. Astor is known prominently for 2 things, which is funny because he's only made 2 movies. But when you look him up, they're like, these are the stylistic traits of Ari Aster, and it's like, one is making very long shots.
And
He
I have
likes
a
to take
comment
his
about
time with
that.
shots. Yes, and he will tell you that you film as much as budget will let you, and then when it's time to edit, it's a sorrowful process because you actually have to take these beautiful long shots and cut them down into something smaller so they'll fit in the film. So he is all about his raw footage.
Well, and I made a comment about that, and that's exactly why a lot of people won't be into this movie, because in a typical quote unquote, what I call it, not Hollywood movie. I've got a name here. I dubbed it, came up somewhere. We'll get to it, but the big quote
Your
unquote
big
Hollywood
budget.
movies,
Yeah.
yeah, they have certain angles and shots, and you expect a certain scene to be a certain way. It's just like we don't even know we expect it, but it feels comfortable. This camera set up 20 minutes of filming,
Yep.
and that's what he does. And it's not close up face all the time. It's backed off and things move and happen, but the camera is very stationary for a lot of this.
Yeah.
And there's definitely a large group of people that wouldn't be enjoyable to them, partly because it's that could be part of the horrific element, just that unease you feel
Yeah.
watching this movie that you're not used to, and that's not even the story itself.
Right. And that's something culturally that we've been taught. It's
Right.
There's not a right or wrong way to do this. It's just the way we're shown. At the very start of the movie, Danny is calling her parents while they're asleep. And there's this very long, slow pan across their bedroom, and then across dad asleep and mom asleep. And then you can kind of see the phone and you can see a picture of Danny. The way traditionally you would shoot that is you would have like the bedroom, and then you would cut to the parents, and then you might cut to the phone with the picture and then move on to the next scene. But
Right.
this very, very long, slow, organic thing is kind of how you would actually work as a person. If you walk into a dark room and you're trying to
Right.
survey the scene, you're going to start on the left and you're going to look to your right. But
And not even more so than that, she's on the phone quite a bit. She calls her boyfriend, Christian, and they're on the phone. Now, typically, you get a split screen occasionally, usually if it's a comedy, or you get back and forth. When they're
right,
talking, but not this. It's like 10 minutes of conversation sitting on her, and you hear both sides, but the camera doesn't move that whole time. And there's a lot of scenes like that.
yeah,
Again, this is where this is a weird movie. It's not large budget, but it's not super small. It wasn't a huge produced Hollywood movie. It's almost an independent film, but it was released as such.
hmm
It's a lot of things that don't mesh up with this movie.
right. Yeah, there's that one scene where she's, doubting herself on her phone with her, best friend. Apparently, we never even see who the best friend was played by.
Right.
Because the whole shot is Danny walking around the apartment on the phone, and you can hear the friend on the phone, but they never show you who she is.
Right. Yeah.
Who knows?
Totally different. So Yeah, I mean, I definitely will give them kudos for doing it different and still making a movie that keeps you engaged.
Yeah. His second trait that he's known for is not shying away from graphic violence.
Really, that one I didn't see at all.
Yeah. He's not afraid to get the camera nice and tight and to linger on horrific scenes.
Which
Um,
were all done very well.
oh
They
yeah.
didn't look like rubber, plastic, and crap at all. It's like
No.
they didn't really do what they just looked like. Right? That's all fake, right? Just making sure.
The third thing for me, this isn't anybody talking but me, but the third thing that I note in his movies is he loves to put ridiculous, minute details in everything, and that's art school training right there. You know, a BFA under my belt, I can tell you they'd beat that into your head. Everything you think about has to tie into the overall theme. When you watch his movie, especially after you've watched it maybe once or twice, there's little tiny hints throughout the entire movie.
Yeah, knowing I'm watching this for our review, I picked up on a bunch of those the first time just
Yeah,
because you start getting what you're watching for. It changes how you watch things.
yeah. And this guy is so ballsy, he takes the entire movie in the first 30 seconds and puts it all out illustrated as a diptych on screen. So
Yes,
you see this folk art diptych, and if you know to look for it and you pause the film, it tells you pretty much everything up until the last 15 minutes of the movie. It's got the
nice. I
entire thing.
didn't realize.
It starts with like death and like her parents and her sister and this hose, and it's all black, and then sunlight, but it's there not for very long. And then the diptych opens, kind of like you're opening the book of a story.
It's kind
Um,
of like the opening of a James Bond movie where they show all the scenes and the little spiraling and everything going on.
yeah, yeah. Um, and then it opens to show us these night scenes in the winter, and there's this ethereal a cappella female voice singing, and it's beautiful. I mean, they're showing these beautiful shots, and it's dreamlike
Yeah,
because that's kind of what it is. It's kind of a dream, and it gets
and
interrupted
and that's
very
one of the
brashly.
elements is what's going on, real or a dream.
Yep.
It's not as explicit as somebody get hit on the head, but there's enough throughout the movie that you could say, well, is this really a dream because of the breakup?
Yeah.
It goes back to being a breakup movie.
Yep. You have that beautiful music, and then all of a sudden there's this harsh sounding phone and a shot of a house in the dark. And that's when we take the camera inside as the phone continues to ring and it pans across her mom and dad asleep. And you hear her on the phone saying, "Hey guys, I got some message from Terry. I was just checking in, making sure everyone's okay." They mentioned that their name is Ardor. Ardor is Latin for flame.
Oh,
So, it's that kind of thing. It doesn't get mentioned much, but on occasions, when you find out Danny's last name is Ardor, and there's this long musicless pan because the singing stopped with the phone ringing. As it goes across the bedroom, there's two people sleeping. There's a photograph of Danny surrounded by summertime flowers. Kind of
that
another
comes up.
hint that, yep. And she's talking about Terry, her sister, and she's not being able to get a hold of Terry. And as the scene's wrapping up, Danny says she loves them and goodbye. And then we go to Danny's perspective, and her back's to the camera in an empty apartment. It's a very lonely looking shot of just her all on her
And we
own.
stay with Danny for quite a while.
We do. She looks at her emails. We get to read Terry's scary email. It says, "I can't anymore. Everything's black. Mom and dad are coming too. Goodbye." That would be a concerning message
A
for pretty
little,
much anybody,
right.
unless
But
you really didn't like them.
but we also start finding out little hints that maybe Danny's not completely all stable herself, which is a whole nother aspect of the movie. Every time something's going on, you can evaluate it. Is this just Danny's interpretation through her chemically unbalanced mind?
Yes.
Whether it's
I
naturally unbalanced chemically or not naturally unbalanced chemically.
I actually read a piece where they argued that the entire movie is basically a redemption arc for her because it's her fault they're dead. The night that
Right.
she calls and voices her concerns to them, and then she doesn't call anybody. And we can see at the start of the movie, they're actually breathing while they're sleeping.
Yeah.
So if she would have called for emergency services right away, her sister probably would have been dead, but her parents would still be alive. But she doesn't.
Hmm.
She second guesses herself.
And again, this is out, all the kids in college that are like writing papers or evaluating movies and stories. Sit down for a weekend, watch this one a couple times. You probably pull a whole lot of, because you're right in that mindset of those types of evaluations.
Yeah. She calls her boyfriend Kristen, um, and she's like on the verge of tears and asking him what's going on. She's like on the verge of tears, obviously upset, but she's trying to make herself sound as normal as she possibly can. She's like, "Hey, hun, what's going on?" And he's like, "Oh, we just smoked down and we're gonna get a pizza." And she asks if he wants to hang out, and he's like, "Yeah, maybe I'll stop by." And then he asks how her sister's situation's going, and she takes this opportunity to say, I'm getting worried, and he's blows the whole thing off. He's like, she does this all the time. And Danny points out, well, she is bipolar. And he's like, that might be, but she always does this. She needs to make it about her. And she calls out, and it's your fault because you encourage this in her. And in the end, and this is the part that drives me nuts through like at least 60% of this movie, she's like, you're right. And she, I'm horrible. Um,
Which, she's obviously a little unbalanced, uh, with her emotions, with her thoughts, and all that, which adds to the movie a whole lot. But this goes back again, the evil part, because he kind of takes advantage of her with what
Absolutely.
he says, knowing her state. And his friends come back here in a minute saying, you've been saying it for a year, you need to break up with her. It's like, well, dude, you're just hanging on. It's not helping her at all. It's
Yeah.
making it worse.
Yeah. In fact, at the end of this call, she's like, I'm so lucky to have you. It's like, are you? Are you really?
But,
She,
he's maybe held on with her the longest,
yeah,
you know?
3 years,
Yeah. She might not have ever had anyone stay with her that long.
I guess. We cut to her pacing in her kitchen. She's talking to her friend, and she's like, she's going to scare Christian off. And her friend's like, he's a loser. uh, So while she's talking to her sensible friend, she goes in the bathroom. She's taking Ativan, which is medicine for anxiety.
One of the few spots in the movie where he focuses on an item like that. That's
Yeah.
very common, but a
Yep.
lot of times he doesn't do that when he could
Right.
have.
Oh yeah. There's a lot of pharmaceuticals taken in this movie. They never tell you what they are.
Right.
While she's talking to her friend, her call waiting goes off. She's getting a call from unknown. Um, we don't get to find out what the call is because we cut back to the pizza place, and Christian's hanging out with his friends at this pizza shop, and his friends are saying, you need to get rid of her, she's too needy, look at all the women you could be having. And as if to prove the point, the waitress kind of flirts with him when she delivers the bill, right? um, Mark is saying that Danny's too much work for his little payoff because she's not really into sex. Josh is saying you need to get rid of her because you're using her as an excuse to not work on your academics. Um, and then Pele points out how many Swedish girls he could be impregnating in June. This is the first reference to the actual Midsummer event. So you have
Right.
these three guys. You have one who like represents sex-driven toxic masculinity in Mark. You have one that represents ambition in Josh, and then you have Pele, who represents the cult. Honestly, as you watch this movie, this is if Astor never comes right out and says that he was influenced by the Wicker Man, but he definitely was, because this is the theme of the Wicker Man. Both versions, you have your cult, you send people into the world, they bring people back.
Yeah.
And those are the people who get put in the big thing and caught on fire. You know?
And so besides the guys being kind of like the muses, that are influencing Christian. The one guy says, and she's not into sex. So this was a question for me right away because I did know a little bit about what the movie was about. I knew some people that had seen it. I saw the previews. There's a little hint, but I'm like, oh, is she a virgin? Because we're talking about this pagan right cult and they're hinting that she could be a virgin. There's, obviously
Yeah,
that's throughout cults' histories and pagan beliefs and everything else.
that question never gets answered either.
No, there's a lot of questions that don't get answered. You mentioned the
Yeah,
pharmaceuticals, and they do a lot of them. So, besides her mental state, her perspective a lot of times is this real? It's okay. Are we on shrooms right now in this part of the movie, or are we not? It could be any because they're drinking a whole lot of things that they won't answer what's in it, and it'll just make you feel better.
it's for your
So,
stamina.
yeah. So, is the camera lens the third party outsider that's viewing what's going on, or is it reflecting what the person in that scene is experiencing at that moment? It's a big question for any scene.
Well, it is, but he actually answers that.
Okay.
At one point in the film, the audience is actually a willing participant in the activities that are going on, and I'll point it out when we get to it.
Okay. Good.
But
Good.
because it's super slight, um, Christian's phone rings. It's Danny. Mark goes on this rant about how she's abusing Christian. He goes to answer it, and it's just wailing on the other end of the line. And we get to find out why because we cut to the Arter's house, and it's a very slow progression. And it's a way to describe what was happening because it starts with firemen in the garage turning the cars off. And then we get a pan over, and there's a hose duct taped to this tailpipe. Then the camera switches to inside as the firefighters walk in, and we see the hose runs on the floor. Then there's an overhead shot of them going up the stairs as they're still following this pipe. And then there's the parents' room where they open the doors, which have been duct taped closed, and the parents are lying in the same position they were at the start, but they're not sleeping anymore.
Right.
You see body bags being zipped. And then as they're carrying the bodies out, they pan over and we see Terry, and she's slumped on the floor of her room. And they slowly pan in to reveal that she has that hose from the exhaust duct taped directly to her mouth. And her laptop is open, which reveals she's got a whole bunch of unread messages from Danny. Here's the supernatural angle to the whole thing. Throughout the movie, there are several times where Terry shows up with a hose in her mouth duct taped to her face. And at least one of them, Danny sees that. Danny
Right.
did not know that detail.
Right.
So
That
this
we
could
know of
be
at least, but
right.
yeah.
But this could be like it's not something she ever saw. So this could like be
Right.
the ghost of her sister haunting her in a
Trying
way.
to protect her, trying to take her
Maybe.
down. It doesn't.
Right.
It's
The film cuts to Christian walking down a snowy street. Then
and
there's just
one comment on the whaling. That's
yeah,
one of those great examples of there could have been a whole long dialogue conversation about her feelings and stuff, but instead it was encapsulated with her doing 10 minutes of just wailing, and that's
yep,
like it. And that's one of those great choices that you don't see a lot of.
yeah, yeah.
They
Especially American directors like to over-explain stuff,
yeah,
and he does a whole lot with just primal crying in this movie.
yeah,
Um, you see him walking, you see Christian walking down the road, then you see him sitting on a couch, and Danny is just laying in his lap wailing. And it's one of the only scenes in the entire movie where I feel bad for Christian because he doesn't know what to do. You know what I mean?
right, right.
Regardless of how much of a douchebag he's there. She's crying. He
Yes.
has no idea how to fix it.
Yes.
Um,
Though I did get the sense from him that he was like, oh my God, just let this over. Like, this is not the first time. And like his friend said, this happens. And he's kind of like, okay, I'm here, but dear God. And all he needed to really do is like glance at his watch.
yeah.
that
Roll his eyes. Yeah.
right.
Then he does this really cool thing to show the passage of time where he pans in to the window behind Christian and it's dark and it's snowy, and then they do the credits, and then it switches to like a summertime shot of the city, and the camera pans back through the window. So it's like 6 months have passed or so.
Right, right. And that the credits were cool too. Small in the center of the screen, kind of faded out. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah. We get this picture of Danny asleep in her bed, but she's not asleep. She's just laying down there looking at the wall. Over her head is a painting. The painting is actually called Stackars Ilibasa, which is translated to Poor Little Bear. It's painted by a Swedish folktale illustrator named John Bauer.
And it
For
looked
a,
familiar to me.
well, it's for a book by Helena Nyblom called Among Gnomes and Trolls, or in Swedish, Askoldens Vandring. It depicts this little girl with a crown kissing a seated bear on the nose, which is
Yeah,
a little prescient of the end of the movie.
yes, yeah, and that looked familiar to me though. I very well could have run across it somewhere.
Yeah. Christian sticks his head in. He's like, "Hey, babe." He doesn't even come into the room. She's obviously depressed. He says he's heading to a party for 45 minutes, and then she says she'll come along. And again, like Steve said, you could almost hear his eyes rolling in his head. He didn't want her to come along, but okay, if she's going to. He also does this thing where sounds are muted, so you're focused on the character. So Danny's at this party. She doesn't really want to be. She's heavily depressed. The music is muffled, as is conversation, and she's just staring in the distance. But sound starts to pick up as you hear Pella explaining that he and the boys are going back to Sweden to celebrate Midsommar in a rural commune he comes from. And Mark is going for research. No, Josh is going for research. And it becomes quickly evident that Christian hasn't mentioned any of this to Danny.
Right.
When she looks at him, he's like, "Oh, I wasn't really going to go. We're just talking about it." So the ride home is quiet, awkward, distant. They get back to this apartment, and there's this cool little shot where Danny's by the door and Christian is reflected in a mirror next to the door. So he's like in a completely other world as they're talking about this. They're arguing about this.
Yeah.
And she's like, it just would have been nice to know. And he basically turns things around so that in the end of their conversation, he gets her to apologize to him and say that she was wrong. And it's like, oh, that's just maddening. For me, at least. The boys are discussing the trip. And again, Christian shows how spineless he is because he convinces his friends, Danny's going to come, act like you want her to go because she won't accept the invitation. And then much to all of their dismay, she says she's going to go.
Yeah. Okay.
And Mark's like, Christian, can I talk to you in this other room here?
What you thinking about?
Yeah. So they walk into the other room. Danny heads over to talk to Pele, who seems genuinely happy that she's coming. He's a little bit of an artist. He's been sketching in his book. It's a still life of a table in front of him, and they talk about school. He's really interested in how her school went, which after he asks the question, he kind of realizes, oh, that's right, your entire family died in the semester, so I don't imagine it actually went that well for you.
Right.
They find out they'll arrive in his hometown on her birthday.
Yes.
And they're headed back for a 9-day ceremony for Midsommar with pageantry and dressing up. And they're having this lovely conversation. And he pulls out his phone and shows her pictures from the previous year. We find out the people who live there are taught the runic alphabet. And there's a May Queen crowned each year. And he tells her how happy he is that she's coming and how sorry he was to hear about her loss. And he was orphaned, it turns out.
Yes. And that right there, I almost heard the dom 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 when he said, "Oh, I'm so glad and happy you came," and I almost got the feeling that he was hoping she would, which was very ominous. Or was there something where he was manipulating things, like you said, that one phone call? We don't know who it was from or whatever. They very much, it was overly ominous without looking ominous whatsoever. It was just, it's a horror movie.
It seemed like an innocent conversation.
Yeah, very much. And so the one part I got confused on was he was showing pictures from the previous year of the Midsommar. So I was thinking about that. I'm like, well, they can't say it's every 90 years, but then they're doing this every year. So I took it as every 90 years was like this year where they have sacrifices and all that. But in between, it's just a normal, fun little festival in
Yeah.
between. That's what
Yeah.
I took that as.
And honestly, if you or I went on one of the off years, it probably would have been lovely, you know?
Right. Enjoyable, fun, humorous, and wearing nice, silly clothes and dancing. And we get a little high or drunk, and off we go.
Yeah. Just check your calendar before you go.
Yeah, count the years.
Yeah.
It's like Haley's Comet.
Yeah, exactly. The Branch Davidians. Um, when he mentions that she starts to have a panic attack, and her depiction of a panic attack through this movie is amazing. I mean, she's
Yeah.
just dead on. She gets up to go to the bathroom, you know, because she doesn't want to have a panic attack in front of everybody. And he does this awesome thing where it's an overhead shot. She walks through the door and she closes the door and she's in the bathroom in the airplane. Again,
Yeah.
time has passed.
Yeah. A
She gets
great
her,
way to do it.
yeah. She gets herself under control. She walks back out, takes her seat, and the camera pans out the window, and sunshine floods it. It blinds the camera again. And as the camera settles, as they change the aperture, you can see that there's fjords, and the music comes in. Music is used very sparingly, but a lot of times when it comes in, it like sets the mood because the music's kind of ominous and suspenseful as we see the fjords below as they're flying by. They're now in a car. Mark is being a misogynist, talking about how hot all the women are, and then Josh, being the academic, is like, well, the women were so hot because the Vikings would kidnap the best women from businesses and bring them back. It's a 4-hour drive out of the city to Pele's home. There's this really cool camera shot where they're taking an overhead shot of the car as it's driving, and then the camera flips everything upside down. So you're not in Kansas anymore. You have entered
Yes.
into a completely different realm.
That was the great visual way of doing it. You know, in the book, the hero's journey, you know, the call to adventure, you're entering the magical world, leaving your normal world. And that was like, yep, that's right there. If you can't name
Yep.
any other scene, it's boom.
There's a banner that crosses the road, and it basically says "Welcome to Helensgard," which is like a state, a Swedish state. And then underneath it, you know, just to keep it authentic, in Swedish it says "Stop mass migration to Helensgard. Vote for a free North this fall." So, you know, apparently you have xenophobic people in most rural areas, I guess, no matter what part of the world you're in. The camera rights itself, and we find ourselves in a field populated with small clusters of people amongst large groups of flowers. Pelle gets out of his car, and people instantly yell greetings to him. And he explains that, you know, they're younger people from his village. They've returned from trips abroad. They're walking through this field. Mark displays this phobia of bugs, and it's a running theme with him constantly. Now, it's very subtle. On occasions, he'll be like, are there ticks or something like that? And there'll be a conversation about him.
Right.
But even when he's not saying stuff, his character, he's constantly like looking over his shoulder and like brushing himself off. Astor put that in there because he's terrified of bugs. So Mark was standing in for Astor in that case. And then Pele's brother Ingmar calls to him and introduces his friends to him. And Astor makes the conscious decision to not subtitle a lot of times when people are speaking in Swedish. So you are just as alienated as everybody else in the group.
Yeah, and I caught that. I'm like, wow, that because you like, oh man, I really would love to know. It makes it more ominous when I'm sure it wasn't. The conversation was,
Yeah. Could just been, hey, how was your right?
But
Ingmar
when Ingmar introduces these friends of his, oh, these
Simon
are friends
and
of mine
Connie.
that I brought, and these are friends. I'm like, oh, that's not good. If everybody went out and brought friends back, that's not good.
Yeah. Ingmar pulls out some hallucinogenic mushrooms. Danny's not really into doing it right now, and then Christian's like, oh, okay, well then I'll wait for you. And then Mark's like, come on. So they all decide to go ahead and do these magic mushrooms. And they're sitting.
They trip pretty hard.
Yeah. They're sitting at the base of this tree, and they're trying to contemplate what time it is. Because the sun's up and it's 9 o'clock, and Mark's like, I don't like it. I don't like it. I'm going to lay down. I'm laying down. It's really nice. Guys, everyone, lay down.
Right.
Danny stares down and she's looking at her hand, and she has blades of grass growing in the backs of her hand. She's already beginning to take root in this area. Um,
Yeah.
and this begins like this Astor's great with hallucinogenic trips. Things start to pop up throughout the film so much that by the end things are pulsing and flowing. You don't even register it by then because it's happened so much throughout the movie. Um, Mark mentions how they're all his family, and Danny almost seems to wake up at that word family. She gets upset and starts to wander off. No one chases after her. You know what? You're just tripping on some hallucinogen. You're going to walk around, knock yourself out in a foreign country.
Right.
She's having a full blown panic attack, convinced people are laughing at her, and she complains to Ingmar, and he's like, no, they've been laughing this whole time, and he wants to introduce her to his friends. And she sees this small shed in the distance. A bathroom, I would guess, maybe.
Yeah.
If you look at
Maybe.
the horizontal line on the roof, you can see it waving
Yeah.
because she's hallucinating. She goes in and strikes a match because it's dark, and there's a mirror in front of her. There's a couple photographs on either side. Neither one of them really seem consequential. But when she strikes the match, you can see there's a person behind her. When you slow the film down, you can see it's not a person, it's Terry. It's her sister Terry with a hose in her mouth and duct tape all around it.
Oh, I didn't catch that. Nice.
Yeah, just you see somebody, but if you actually pause it, it's Terry with the hose.
Nice.
Danny's freaked out. She goes running in the glaring sunlight, heads for the woods, and the screen goes black. And we see her parents and Terry sitting on a couch watching TV, but her parents look suspiciously dead already. And Terry turns and looks directly into the camera, and the screen goes black. So Danny's lying on the ground in the sunlight, and Christian's waking her. There's more discussion on the time. Is it tomorrow? Well, from yesterday's perspective. And Danny asks where they're going. Instead of a location, Pele says, what we came for. Where are we going? What are we doing? What we came for. And then
Right.
there's another great overhead shot of the group walking down this wooded trail as music kicks in again, but it's not ominous. It's kind of amorphic and flowy. You'd be
Right.
hard pressed to pick out a melody you could hum afterwards.
I made the comment throughout the movie, not just here, but even later on. A lot of this movie is kind of like a silent ballet because, who would go see a silent ballet with just the people, no music or anything? This movie doesn't have a lot of dialogue. You'll go through whole sections where it's music and picture, but no dialogue, no action per se. It just struck me for some reason that if this was something else, it'd be a silent ballet. It's just
Yeah.
different.
Yeah. Um, there, the scales, the song that they're playing is just a series of scales that just keep going up and then start over and going up. So it's like a perpetual climb almost. Um, and you can see overhead they're on this, like, I don't want to say paved, but it's like a worn trail. Then they cut to the right and take the path less taken. Um, and they find themselves coming out of the woods into a clearing. Um, Mark continues to worry about ticks, and his friends aren't helping because they're talking about all these horrible people who got Lyme disease and how horrible it was.
And
Um,
remember that though.
yeah, the wooded trail they're on is lined with these beautiful yellow flowers, and they're very careful to like pick their steps so they're not actually stepping on the flowers, which I thought was kind of interesting. And they come to the clearing, and they go through this massive sun-shaped archway only to be greeted by a welcoming committee dressed in all matching plain white robes. There are white robed people in the distance picking plants, others hugging new arrivals, and the music you've been hearing this entire hike is played by a small group of pipers off to one side. The view actually takes Danny's breath away. She stops, she like inhales, and she smiles for another second, which is probably the first genuine smile she has in the entire movie when she
True.
first walks into this town. Mark, being the charmer that he is, asks if were they stopping off at Waco before they go to Pele's village, because he is nothing if not tactful. A couple of youths come up and hand everybody strawberries, and they eat them, Don't even ask. They just, take them and they're like eating these strawberries. They take their bags away, and Pele comes back with a girl he claims to be his sister, which we find out that he calls everyone here his brothers and sisters. Ingmar's not really his brother. This girl's not really his sister. He then
But in a
sees,
small commune like that,
yeah, it's
it's
not uncommon.
and they even make a comment later about the kid and everybody raises them. So
Yes.
it is, one big family is what they portray.
Yeah. He sees Brother Ott, and he introduces Brother Ott to them, and he shakes everyone's hand, saying hi to everybody except for Danny. He hugs Danny and says, "Welcome home" to her.
Yes.
So she's already kind of set apart from everybody else there. She compliments his frock, which he says they wear out of respect for Ymir. Um, Ymir was like the progenitor god of the Norse people. So he is the one who fashioned the earth. Odin and all the others sprang from various body parts of his.
I was going to say,
So
yeah, right.
not unlike Gaia and Kronos and stuff for the Greeks. Josh goes on this brief sociological blurb about how that tradition of wearing the frock is like seen throughout the world. Um, the music changes and everyone congregates toward the maypole, which is this prominent thing in the middle.
And that's so weird when they move. That's the first big cult thing I saw. When
Because
they,
everyone's moving together.
yeah, and gong and they all stop and turn and move. Yeah,
There's a
definitely.
there's a lot of that with the community in this, where they will um, they look straight ahead, they keep their hands down, and they walk very plainly,
They
very
smile.
uniformly. Yeah, yeah. Um, there's a female elder there. We find out it's Siv later on, but she addresses the crowd in Swedish. Josh asks if he can take photos, and Pele says yes, but do it discreetly. And after Siv starts her thing in Swedish, she apologizes and addresses the crowd in English, welcoming them to the 9-day feast. It says it's been 90 years since the last great feast, and it'll be 90 years before the next one. Everyone's given a glass, and everyone toasts this and drinks. Again, no one asking what's in it. They're just doing it.
And the thing with the pictures, I mean, it almost was so subtly not pointed out that it stuck out to me. And I thought it was weird because, wow, most of these things, they're like, oh, no pictures, I was surprised they had outsiders. And then later, when they want to do the research, they let them have access to almost everything. It's like, why would they do that? Well, because they're not worried about it,
Right.
is what it comes down to.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a whole lot of tension and, like the whole thing with the book being gone and all this, and all made up. It's all just done, to, like you said, build tension or division between them. There is a cut here after everyone toasts the 90 days till the next one. There's a cut here that seems really out of place at the time. And you see some fingers mixing paint on a paper palette. And you're like, what in the heck? And the camera pulls back and it reveals this white haired, deformed face looking intently at what it's painting.
Right.
Then there's a drum noise in the distance, and the face looks up, and we cut back to the festivities. And so it's almost like here's this beautiful place. Here are all of these beautiful people all hanging out doing all of this stuff way out in the open. However, there's this kind of ugly underside to it that's hidden away that we don't know about yet, kind of thing.
Right. Or is the whole thing the ugly undercurrent, but we don't see it yet, too?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, well, we're at an hour and 10 minutes.
Do you want to do a two-parter?
I'm kind of wondering because
Yeah,
we're not to the halfway point of the movie yet.
I was thinking that same thing. Well, yeah, we could do a part A, part B, and that makes sense because nobody's want to go listen to us ramble for that long, but it's worth it, needs it. So
Well,
yeah,
when you mentioned that yesterday, I was like, I don't know that it'd be enough for a second part, but seeing where we're at now, yeah, I think you could
because there's a
easily
lot to
do it.
talk about. Yeah.
Yeah, you could
Yeah.
easily
And
do another hour.
even if it's 45 minutes, still it'll be worth it. So we could do that. So
Yeah,
part A, part 1, whatever.
awesome.
We'll keep everybody on their toes.
Yes, after we show that there's some sort of undercurrent of ugliness that exists here hidden away, we'll
What
get
will happen
back.
next?
Exactly. Dun, dun,
Next week, same
dun.
time, same match.
Yeah.
All right, yeah, we could do that. I got stuff I should probably go do anyway. So
Yeah. Well, yeah. I was thinking more along the pacing concept of, yeah, having a
wow,
2-hour podcast to sit and listen to.
are we that technical? I mean, that's pushing it.